want to remind everybody that first we give you the jargon term, and then we give you an actual definition. And often, Dr. Tarbox, I make fun of the actual definition because the definition is filled with more jargon and you're just down that rabbit hole. And then we move on to a working definition, which sometimes is a little, the pendulum swings too far the other way. And then we try to give some context to it, to see if we can't have a beginning understanding. And for those of you who have started watching the show in the last couple of years, you know how I say that I always quote you. There are a couple of things that I quote you with, Dr. Tarbox, but with the jargon, I always quote you that you used to say to us, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Oh,
and that's
yeah.
What we do.
Which is really weird. Can you imagine eating an elephant? It's actually kind of a gross metaphor, but somehow it works.
Well, yes, but it's the idea of, how do you climb Mount Everest? You have to do it one step at a time.
Yeah,
and that's what we try to do with the jargon terms. So do we feel ready to take this on?
Let's do it.
Now that you understand how the unconventional rules of this. Okay.
No, I love the rules. These are the exact rules that I use to train my grad students too. Is first, you need to be bilingual at least. You need to be able to understand and define it in technical terms. And then you also need to be able to just understand and talk about it in common sense terms that you could explain to your grandmother or a client's parent, or that you could just talk to yourself about in a way that makes sense and actually just sounds like people talking to people.
And Dr. Tarbox, I have loved that about you since the very first day that I met you, that is how you roll. And I think it's why so many people in the community, when they meet you, everyone describes it the same thing, that it's sort of like, oh, I've stepped into a warm bath. Like I feel like I've come home, I'm with an expert, and they're going to say things in a way that I understand them. And I see you preaching this to your scientific community all the time. And I do see that there are many converts because of you, people who get it and start talking about it in this way. But what is the holdup on this? Why are there so many people in your field who still do not get this?
I'm not sure, but I will say I think it's true of most natural sciences. Like if you talk to, let's say, a chemist or a biologist or a physicist or something, they're also probably not very good at explaining what they do scientifically in lay terms. The difference is with ABA, our subject matter is the behavior of all of us. So it kind of seems like it should be. It should make sense, you know what I mean? And it needs to make sense if we're going to help empower other people to change their own behavior in ways that are meaningful and important. It kind of does need to make sense. But the truth is it actually, it is a science. It's a natural science. And so there isn't any reason why the technical and scientific knowledge should be any simpler necessarily, or any easier to understand than any other natural science. So I think we have this problem of our subject matter is the everyday sort of meat and potatoes of what we do, our own behavior that we all see every day. And yet it is also a science. And so it is quite technical. And Skinner talked about this problem all the time, decades ago, about how everyone thinks they're an expert on human behavior because we all do it all day, every day. And yet very few people actually take this time to study it scientifically. So that's what our science is about.
All right. Well, having said that, let's jump on into some jargon here. So our jargon term for today, which we've never done before with good reason, because we wouldn't have waded in without an expert, is cognitive diffusion. And so I know everybody's like, what? To me, this sounds like you're taking our brains and putting it through a swirly. So that's what I get from that. But let's look at what our actual definition for the day is and who we've credited for this. I found a study that we credited. It's a mouthful. A technique used in acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, as part of its contextual behavioral approach to psychotherapy and other behavioral health concerns. Cognitive diffusion, quote, refers to the reduction of stimulus function transformation that occurs through verbal relation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And this is from the study, Cognitive Defusion in Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And you see the reference there along with the link if you would like to read this scintillating read, which it actually kind of was. But let me first say, Dr. Tarbox, that ACT is something that you're an expert in, that you've been talking about a lot. We talk about it a little bit on the show, but I hear this phrase, contextual behavioral approach, all the time. I have no idea what that means.
There's
It's
another piece
literally,
of jargon.
that's another piece of jargon right there. I'm not sure, like when you talk about psychotherapy, I bring, more than 50 years of movies and things to that, but I'm not even sure that I really know what psychotherapy is. I think I know a little bit about behavioral health concerns. I'm gonna say that I probably know a little bit about that, but the reduction of stimulus function transformation, oh, you've lost me completely. And then you round it out with verbal relation, and I go, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building.
Yeah. So this is a classic case of have one piece of jargon and then put 18 more behind it to try to explain the first one. Yeah. Sure.
No hope of understanding. So we're going to come back to some of this and see if we can't shed some light on it. But let's move on to our working definition, which again, we're going to swing it far the other way and take it down as much as we possibly can. Cognitive diffusion is allowing thoughts to occur without letting them stop you from doing what is important to you. Shut the front door. That's what that other thing meant.
Yeah, it actually is. Yes, that you did a good job picking the sort of lay definition and the technical definition that actually do mean the same thing. It doesn't make sense at face value, but it's true.
Even knowing it, I can't put the two together. Yeah. But when you talk about this, allowing thoughts to occur without letting them stopping you doing from what's important to you, then I go, oh, holy business, this seems like something that's going to be crucial toward me accomplishing what I want in my life, and being able to deal with some of the crap that prevents me from doing it. So first, let's talk about cognitive diffusion itself and what this is and why it's so important. Take it away, Dr. Tarbox.
All right. Yeah. So I guess I think it's useful to start with just a teeny bit of sort of backstory on sort of like the human mind and where it came from and how it evolved. And people, a lot of folks in the contextual behavior science field or the ACT area, arena talk about the human mind or the human brain as sort of like evolved as a sort of overactive problem solver. So you could think of like, when we were cave people running around out on the savannah or whatever, we were constantly having to problem solve, and we were constantly having to avoid getting eaten by a lion, or we were having to figure out where the best, most productive fruit trees were to pick fruit, or we're having to warn each other about, this fruit is poisonous or whatever. So basically we had to evolve the ability to detect disaster in the future and create rules for how to avoid disaster. That was basically like had survival value. And that's essentially that, like that ability to do that verbally and to talk to each other about that is really part of what helped us evolve into tool users and, modern humans. And so here's the problem is now every day when we're hanging out in our normal lives, there's very few lions trying to eat us anymore, right? And so there's very few disasters that we actually have to sort of detect and prevent. There's certainly some for sure, but that's not like the sort of general state of affairs anymore. Usually we're relatively safe physically, right? And usually we're in a situation where it's better to just tune in and be present and just do the thing, like perform, like be fully present with whatever you're going to do and enjoy it, and move towards what matters to you. That would be ideal, right? But we've got the human mind, or this sort of problem solving machine running on overtime constantly. And so cognitive diffusion work is about learning how to build a better relationship with that mind that's always coming up with thoughts that frankly most of the time aren't that helpful. And so we've got this like sort of constant presence and availability of like thoughts like I'm too tired, or I'm too stressed out, or I'm too, if you want to take it to parents of autistic folks, maybe it's like he should know that what he did was wrong, he needs to take responsibility for it, or I'm too exhausted, I can't do it, or I'm not going to have the future that I thought I was going to have for my family, right? All of these thoughts pop into our heads that frankly most of the time aren't that useful. Like if it comes time to planning a strategy for the IEP meeting, yes, we need that sort of problem solving, overthinking, like strategizing mind. That's helpful then. Most contexts, it's not that helpful. And so cognitive diffusion is about, it's a set of skill training procedures that help us develop new skills of dealing with our own minds and responding to our own minds. And so one way that Steve Hayes puts it is notice what's there, take what's useful and use it, and leave the rest. Like, we don't have to get rid of it, but just set it aside and move towards what matters. So let's just say it's date night, right? Like, imagine that we ever had time for that, right? But you're out to dinner with your partner, and like, you got an hour to enjoy your time with your partner. Is that a great time to be worrying about the future? Like, is that a useful context in which it's productive and practical to be thinking a lot about the future and what could go wrong? Not so much, right? It's not to say we shouldn't plan for the future, but in that context, when you have that opportunity to share some moments of intimacy with your partner, in that context, those thoughts aren't useful. So it's about noticing those thoughts and gaining the ability to sort of set them aside and then tune into what really matters to you in the moment.
It's kind of amazing, and I love some of the comments that we're getting. I know I've been able to do a little bit of ACT in relation to being a parent of someone who's neurodiverse. And one of the things that I noticed was, and then I notice now across the board, and I look at this for not just myself, but for everybody, is that I had all these things that I really wanted and still want for my son that had to do with independence. But I am someone who's very fearful of the world. And I have all of these thoughts about, like, I've had many people call me and say, don't watch that Netflix show, The Worst World Roommate in the World, or the, whatever that is, because they've said you'll never allow your son to move out of your house. Don't do it, Shannon. We know you, because I can get bogged down in those fearful things about what if this and what if that and what if that, to the point where it has come out of my mouth before that I would like to duct tape my son to the wall so that nothing can ever happen to him.
Yeah.
And so I think about things in terms of that I have this going on in my head, but a lot of times people will tell you, well, just let that go. Just like, ignore that, pretend it doesn't happen. That has never worked for me, but that's not what you're talking about, right?
No, oh no. I mean, that would be great. If we just had an on-off switch for unhelpful thoughts, great. Hit the off switch, And some people learn really maladaptive ways of hitting the off switch. For example, too much alcohol, right?
Eating?
Yeah. Too much eating, too much alcohol, too much sleeping, too much binging social media or Netflix or whatever. All of those things, if we do them to excess, kind of do turn off those unhelpful thoughts in the short term, right? But then we wake up the next day and we're like, man, why did I eat all that? Or why did I drink all that? Or why did I blow 3 hours on stupid social media when I had important stuff to do, right? And so it's not a real solution. And so, it would be great if we could turn it off. We can't. It's not an option. To have those unhelpful thoughts is to be human. It's just part of how we're wired as human beings. We don't get to not have them. It's not an option. So you could try to control them if you want. And there are certain approaches to psychotherapy that are sort of based on that. Like, if you have, irrational thoughts, try to change them into rational thoughts, or try to control them, try to make them go away. As far as, from my understanding, the research is pretty clear that it just doesn't work very well to control your thoughts and your feelings. If you found strategies that work for you in certain contexts, do it, go for it by all means. But there's good research to show that letting the thoughts and the feelings be there, and just letting them be there, take what's useful from them and use that, and then just leave the rest. That doesn't mean cancel them, make them go away, or control them. Just means, here, hold them next to you while you then pick what matters to you in that moment and do the thing that matters to you in the moment. So it's not about getting rid of them or controlling them. It's about letting them be there, just letting them be, like noticing them, And so there's all kinds of goofy strategies for this. And if you want to get into it, we can certainly talk about like some of the procedures that people do to sort of practice building these skills.
Well, in fact, Johanny wrote in and said, do we use cognitive diffusion for depression and anxiety? Do we apply it to younger individuals or to adults? And do most psychotherapists use it? So can we answer those and then start talking about maybe at least one technique that we could do today to do this?
Yeah, sure. So lots of questions in that question there.
Yes.
I'm not a depression or anxiety researcher, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that. But yes, my understanding is ACT therapists who treat depression and anxiety definitely involve cognitive diffusion in their work, and so I know that that's an area of application. And then do we apply it for younger individuals or adults? Absolutely. And so there's lots of ways to do cognitive diffusion that can be really abstract and really heady, maybe if for people who are sort of more philosophically oriented. And then there's lots of ways that we can break it down into really tangible, simple stuff and even physicalize it. So it's like involving motor movement and involving humor. Humor is really helpful for cognitive diffusion. And absolutely, it's adaptable to children too. Do most psychotherapists use it? I don't know about that. I would say ACT is one of the most well-known, most mainstream approaches to cognitive behavior therapy these days. And so I do think that most people getting their PhD in psychology these days learn about ACT, and diffusion is a big part of ACT. So I would say most people, most new psychologists are being trained on it or having some awareness of it. I'm not sure that I could say most psychologists like today, if you walk into an office, are using it. Probably not. I mean, most psychologists are older and have been trained, earlier. So I'm not sure exactly about the prevalence, I guess, of that, if that makes sense.
So when I crack jokes, which is what I do whenever something is very serious, is that a form of cognitive diffusion?
Yeah, it's a great question. So really, we would think about that functionally. So if the main purpose of cracking the joke is to avoid feeling discomfort, then maybe not. That would be more like an avoidance strategy. But if the main purpose of the joke, or the function of that behavior, if you will, if the main function of that joke cracking behavior is to disrupt the power of thoughts to control you, especially towards doing stuff that you don't love, then yes, definitely. So if I'm experiencing something difficult as a parent, and and I'm having thoughts like I can't do this, I'm just too tired or something, and I think probably what I'm about to do is be kind of grouchy with my kids, because that's the fastest way to just get them to do what I need them to do right now. And then I crack a joke like, oh, awesome, here comes Mr. Grouchy Pants again, and then that creates a little space to go, oh, right, that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. And then I choose a different behavior. Instead of being grouchy, I take a deep breath. I give him a hug. I look him in the eyes and say, man, I really need you to do this right now. Can we get this done together? And if that's the function of that joke cracking behavior, is to create a space for that and to kind of free me up from thoughts like, I can't do this, I'm too tired, we got to just get it done, then yes, it could be an example of diffusion.
Oh my gosh. So this is really good stuff. So help us, what's another example of how we might use cognitive diffusion today?
So a really great, there's lots, but basically it's anything that you do in reaction to your thought other than rigidly following what the thought says to do.
Okay.
So if you think about your thought as like somebody else telling you what to do, and if you're just compliant with that and fully obey, that's not diffusion. In fact, that would be like fusion, meaning like you're just kind of obeying the thoughts. You're taking them very literally or seriously. If you could imagine some person, telling you what to do, and you do something different than just obeying it. So for example, you might go, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting that you're telling me to do that. I wonder if I want to do that. And then maybe you do it or don't do it. Or maybe you repeat the command back to the person in a silly voice, like, in a Batman accent or something, or maybe you like spray paint what the person commanded you to do on the wall instead of actually doing what they told you to. You get where I'm going? Just anything other than just obedience to the thought. That could be an example of practicing diffusion.
Interesting. Okay. Fascinating. And so when you're teaching a parent, because part of the reason why we're talking about this is a lot of times, whether we're the person on the spectrum, because we see that there's some perseveration on things with people that are on the spectrum, but I think that people who are much better at perseveration are the caregivers, parents, that sometimes we get stuck in a groove. Sure. I will hold myself accountable and say I easily get stuck in a groove. I say sometimes that, when my son was diagnosed with autism, there were things that I was angry about.
Yeah.
And that I was resentful about, that had nothing to do with him, but it was all about getting services started, who I needed to be in order to make things work, that I didn't always feel up to it. Right. I always like to define that, because people go, oh, you were mad at your son. Not at all. No. Not one day, not a single day was I mad at him. what I found difficult and trying was negotiating all of, and you guys know what I'm talking about, right? All the stuff that you got to negotiate, the paperwork and all of that. That was what was overwhelming. And I could get myself angry. I was like a lighthouse looking for who could I put the anger on.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I could find somebody that I could be really angry about, then I would sort of rigidly stick into that and be in this groove of, oh, and the sort of script was, oh, you know, nothing good ever happens for us. People aren't trying to help us. And I would be stuck in that mode while I would be in a place where somebody really probably was available to help me, but I would come at them with a wall of anger.
Yeah.
So if I'm a parent who finds myself stuck in that negativity,
Mm-hmm.
and not open to having the people who are in front of me who want to help me, how would we use cognitive diffusion on that, Dr. Tarbox?
Yeah. Well, I would say use the trick called name your story. And so you were talking about this sort of narrative and this story and this theme you were living inside of about being angry and about people not helping me and all of that. So like if you could come up with that, if that was like a theme song for your life at that time, like a Broadway theme song, what would it be called?
Nobody cares. Probably.
Nobody cares.
Yeah,
Okay,
nobody cares.
so then if I was your trainer right now, what I'd be back then, what I would recommend is when you notice you're in a situation where you're feeling angry again, and it's possible that you're in a context where someone actually is going to help you, and so maybe anger isn't the most effective or most practical strategy in that context, you could try just noticing, just practicing noticing and saying something like, oh, here comes the nobody likes me story again, or nobody cares story again. Or you could say like, oh
I'm
man.
going to work this up into a musical number when I redo my show.
Well, and you could. That is actually something we'd recommend.
Yeah.
Carefully, because we don't want people to think we're making fun of them. But I would
No.
suggest actually choreographing a little dance routine to it. Nobody loves us. Nobody cares. You know, you could do it in your head. Like, don't actually do that in the IEP meeting, but you could do it in your head. And if that creates if that humor creates just a little space for you to think a little more openly and to give somebody a chance, maybe who's trying to help you, maybe that's helpful. And maybe not. That's okay too. But at least it's more flexible and a little bit, it provides a little more opportunity than just doing the old anger thing, which is I'm mad, nobody cares, and I'm going to show you that I'm mad at you. Which sometimes that's fine, that's practical, right? But you're saying sometimes it's not, right? So some flexibility around that could be useful.
Well, because sometimes you just get stuck in that groove and you miss what's in front of you. But what I love about this is it doesn't say poo-poo it. It says, let's bring it right out into the light. Let's look at it. Is it useful? And if it's not, like, what else do we have?
Exactly.
I love that because otherwise we're pushing it down, stuffing it down. And I think that leads to all kinds of not fun things. All right.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, could I share one more strategy?
Yes.
I learned from you. So this, no, I mean, you taught me this. So I was reading your book, or like the proofs or the galleys or whatever for your book a couple of weeks ago. And I was reminded of one of my favorite pieces of wisdom that I got from you, which was other people's opinion of my parenting are none of my business. And I think that's a diffusion strategy. I mean, you didn't create it that way on purpose necessarily, or maybe you did. But to me, that's a diffusion strategy because I'm walking through the store. Maybe my kid is acting out or something. I immediately start to think everybody thinks I'm a bad parent, or everybody thinks I'm a bad dad, or whatever. Right then, in that moment, if I then choose to do something that's not in my kid's best interest or not in my best interest, just to help me avoid other people's judgment, then in my opinion, I've kind of lost, right? I've lost the battle. So what I want to do is what matters for my kid and what matters for my family. And so if in that moment, I remind myself of the mantra, other people's opinion of my parenting is none of my business. And then that creates a little opportunity to then choose something that I really care about rather than just responding to that thought of everyone thinks I'm a bad parent. That's a great example.
Wow. Well, that's powerful for me. It is something that I found myself saying a lot. And even for those of you, I think we've talked about this before. I do have a book coming out, and Dr. Tarbox was so nice to read it ahead of time, and which I so appreciate. And what's funny is that somebody else that I had read the book then went to my son and made a comment to them about something that's in the book. I talked about Halloween and how my son, we didn't allow my son to have candy for a lot of years. And so this person who I love and adore and I respect their opinion went to him and said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe your mother didn't allow you to have candy for Halloween." And then he came to me and said, "Boy, the look on her face, it was like, you're horrible for not." And I said, "How did you respond?" And he said, "I told her I didn't like candy, but I found myself in that moment where I was like, am I a terrible parent and then I went,
Yeah.
did I not just write in a book the thing that I'm supposed to say to myself?" And then I sat there in the car and I was like, wait a second, their opinion of my parenting is none of my business. Even though I love and respect them, they weren't with me in that moment. And then I went, it's that Ileana Van Zandt thing of heal yourself. and then I kind of made fun of myself and laughed about it. And I was like, oh, this is so funny. I need my own book.
Well, no, but see, that's important because, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm happy that you shared that, because none of this stuff, any of the cognitive diffusion or any of the other ACT work, none of it is knowledge that once you have it, you're done. All of it is an ongoing practice, just like mindfulness practice, just like yoga, just like exercise, just like anything, kindness, even, and compassion. It's an ongoing practice. No, like understanding the concept is not what it's about. It's about making choices every day to practice that. And then when you recognize, oh, like I'm not perfect at it, 10 years later, 20 years later, you got the #1 autism podcast. You're like a parenting guru in autism, and you too, every now and then, need to remind yourself, you know what?
Every
Other
now and
people's
then?
opinion of my parenting, none of my business. And that's okay. That's not a failure. That's you doing the work. That's the practice. That's what it's about.
Amen to that. See how he can turn it all around. I just want to acknowledge Gareth has written in and said that doctors tend to not understand when he's talking about being stuck in a negativity thing, and that many just read books to apply. But I want you to recognize, Gareth, that in some ways you're doing exactly what I was doing before about making these definitive statements about nobody listens, nobody cares, nobody understands. And that maybe you can use some of the things that Dr. Tarbox was talking about to acknowledge that that's what you're feeling. You're feeling like nobody listens, nobody understands. But is that the whole truth?
Right, exactly. And being stuck in a negativity loop, it's awful. And it's part of being human. I mean, we've got names for that. I guess if you get stuck bad enough in a negativity loop, you can get a diagnosis of depression. If you're not getting out of bed, if you're not doing stuff that you want to do, not living a life of meaning and purpose, then you can go and get a diagnosis so they can stick a name on that, And also, though, it's just human. We all have the full range of human emotions. Nobody gets a free pass on any of the emotions. Nobody gets to be positive all the time, and nobody gets to be negative all the time. It is normal to get stuck in negativity loops. And so if you're interpreting, and again, I know we can't give specific advice, but if one is interpreting doctors saying like, here, read this book and get over it, that is definitely not what I'm talking about here. And that's not what cognitive diffusion is about. It's about noticing the negativity loop and making room for it, and then asking like, is it useful right now? Is there another thing that I can do other than what I normally do in response to experiencing the negativity loop? What choices do I normally make? And is there space to make a little bit different choice? And just try it and see what happens. And if that wasn't effective or powerful for me, tomorrow I make a third choice and a fourth choice and a fifth choice. The idea is get out there and try many different things, even still while I'm stuck in the negativity loop. Try different behaviors and see which ones impact you in ways that are meaningful to you. And it's still not going to make the negativity loop go away. The question isn't how to make it go away. It's how to develop new flexible habits in its presence.
And maybe making room for finding, you might have been to 32 doctors who aren't helpful, but it might be the 34th doctor that you go to that might be helpful. It's possible.
Yeah. And I can empathize with how frustrating and demoralizing that is. I mean, many of us have had that experience. That's, very, very challenging.
Thanks for watching Autism Live. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.